Yo, what's up, nerds? It's MTG Man, and welcome to an $100 deck tech. Slash, if I had a fucking briefcase full of decks like Seto Kaiba, what decks would I have in there? And today is Flubs the Fool. So, it's a Teamer 0/5. You can play an additional land on each of your turns, and whenever you play a land or cast a spell, draw a card if you have no cards in hand, otherwise discard a card. While this seems pretty simple on paper, there's a lot of things you have to remember here. So let's just take a little look here. So, if Flubs is on the battlefield, and we have, let's just say, 2 cards in hand, we're fucked, because we play 1 card, Flubs sees we have cards in hand, so we have to discard the other one, so the turn is basically over. If we have only 1 card in hand, we can play it, and then we draw, and then we play the next card, and we draw, and that's how the deck kind of goes off, right? You want to play card after card in your hand, or something like that. If we have 3 cards in hand, we are fine, because we can play a card, discard a card, play the next card. That's fine. Now, the other way that we can get out of that is, let's just say, we're going to pretend that Gut Shot isn't Gut Shot. We're going to pretend Gut Shot is a 1 mana draw 1, right? If we play that, then we draw a card, and then Flub sees, like, okay, if it's the last card in hand, if we have 1 card and this 1 card says draw 1, we get to play it, draw 1, we have to discard from Flubs, and that doesn't work. However, if we have 2 cards in hand and one of them's a draw spell, we can draw a spell, draw a card, discard the other card to Flubs, and now we're back at 1, so we can continue going. As you can tell, this deck is kind of strange. It works on strings and probability and almost gambling. It's very funny because this deck can go super fucking far if you can just keep drawing the right cards. So let's just get into it. First off, these are kind of like draw effects or alternatives to drawing. So like Eruth, if you would draw a card, you exile the top 2 cards of your library instead. So if you have an empty hand, Flubs will just like continue to let you exile 2, exile 2, exile 2, and you can probably go off just twice as fast. In T, so whenever you discard 1 or more cards, you exile the top card of your library, and you can play it until your next end step. So this means if you're discarding a card from Flubs, you're basically still drawing a card, so you can continue going off. Loot the Key to Everything, kind of just a good way to discard cards, or not discard cards, to exile cards that you can play. The deck wants to have as many cards as available to play as possible. Party Thrasher lets you discard a card, which could help you get down to 0 cards in hand, and then you get to exile the top 2 and play 1 of them, so it's just a good option. Impulse, because it's nice to choose one of the top 4 cards. Plus, if you're at 2 cards in hand, this can act as your draw 1. Quiet Speculation. The cool thing about Flubs is that it doesn't care where you cast the spells from. So if you have spells with flashback in your graveyard, you can cast them to kind of fix your hand size. Or if you discard it down to 0, well then you cast something with flashback, you draw a card, and then you can just kind of continue going. So Quiet Speculation almost acts as like a draw 3, which is pretty strong, and it gives you 3 options to continue with Flubs, which is very nice. Tectonic Reformation, you can cycle it if need be. That's going to give lands in your hand cycling. Sure, Flubs lets you play extra land. Sure, we have other ways to play extra lands in this deck, but sometimes you might run out of extra lands, and at that point it's best to just cycle it to keep it going. Autumn of Augur lets you look at the top card of your library anytime, and you can play lands, so this will kind of just help continue your string. And then you can also cast creatures, as long as you have 3 or more creatures with different powers. So if Flubs is on the battlefield and Augur is on the battlefield, you'll have 0 and 2. So all you need is a creature with 1 power or 4 power, and you'll basically have her Coven ability, which will just let you continue your strings longer. Azusa, playing 2 extra lands is going to let you just draw extra cards, keep going with Flubs. Loot is going to let you play an extra land and just keep going. And if you notice, they're both 1/2s. 1/2, 1/4. So that's basically Coven setup right there. Lotus Cobra, if you're playing lands extra every turn, this is going to let you get more mana to cast more spells to keep going with Flubs. Storm-Kiln Artist, if you're going to keep casting spells with Flubs, you get treasures to cast more spells, and you can just keep going. Tireless Provisioner, basically a Lotus Cobra, but it creates treasures, which you can just save for other turns. Song of Creation, whenever you cast a spell, you draw 2 cards. So if you're at 0 in hand with Flubs, this will make you go up to 3. And then from, like, it's just going to help you continue going off, and you can play extra lands. Next up are what I'm going to call fail-safes. These are cards that are going to help in that scenario where, you know, you'd go to 0 cards and your turn would basically be over, right? Because if you have 2 cards, you play 1 card and then you discard Basking Rootwalla or Blazing Rootwalla, you can cast them for their madness, and then since you have 0 cards in hand, you'll get to draw a card. So it's going to let you continue going even though it looks like you'd have no way to continue. Ramunap Excavator is going to let you cast lands from your graveyard. Basically just another way to keep going. If you don't have lands in hand, just play one from the graveyard. Ancient Grudge, Lava Dart, Obsessive Search, Artful Dodge, Shatter of the Squirrel, Deep Analysis. They're basically all just flashback spells that you can cast from your graveyard if you need that extra card. The small problem with Obsessive Search is madness, not flashback. We're good. Again, Obsessive Search, if it would be like the last card in your hand and you would discard it to Flubs, because, you know, you had 2 cards, you played 1, you have to discard the other, you can use Obsessive Search through madness to draw a card and just continue your turn. Burning-Tree Emissary and Wild Cantor are both kind of like free because they pay themselves back once they enter the battlefield, or if you sacrifice them, so it can kind of just continue your turn. Mishra's Bauble, because it's a free spell that draws you a card. Gush is going to let you return 2 islands to your hand, and it lets you draw 2 cards. So, in a deck where you're replaying lands to draw cards anyway, and to, like, get more value, returning 2 islands really isn't that much of a problem. And drawing 2 cards can kind of get you out of, you know, if you're at 2 cards, it'll bring you to 6 total. It can kind of just help you fuck with your hand total. Snap lets you untap 2 lands. So it's basically just a free spell. Gitaxian Probe lets you cast it for 2 life, so it's basically just a free spell. Jeska's Will is going to pay itself back with red mana. Mana Geyser is going to pay itself back with red mana. More just in cases, we have Dream Twist, Otherworldly Gaze, and Secrets of the Key. It's basically, if you run out of cards, you can just flash them back real cheap. And the nice thing about Secrets of the Key is that if you investigate, you don't have to crack the clue immediately. So if you're at 2 cards, you can just crack a clue to bring yourself up to 3, so you can kind of just continue your turn. Ramp-wise, Arcane Signet, Gruul Signet, Izzet Signet, Simic Signet, Soul Ring, Talisman, Explore, Rampant Growth. The nice thing is, you don't really care about ramping out that much, because all of your ramp is also going to be drawing you cards if you're continuing with Flubs the Fool. Removal-wise, Beast Within, Cathartic Pyre, Chaos Warp, Counterspell, Gutshot, which is also just a free spell, Spell Pierce, and if you notice, there was like an Ancient Grudge earlier. There's other ways to remove things in the deck. Erebor Flamesmith is just going to help burn your opponents out if you're casting spells. Chatterstorm and Empty the Warrens and Mind's Desire can help you storm off, because that might just be how you win, honestly. This deck has a couple of different win cons, but being able to storm off is probably going to be one of the biggest ones. Conspiracy Theorist, whenever you discard 1 or more non-land cards, you can exile one of them from your graveyard, and if you do, you can cast it this turn. So if you discard a card with Flubs, you can then just exile it and play it, so it's going to keep you from going down. Containment Construct does the same thing. Ghirapur Orrery, it lets you play an additional land on each of your turns, and at the beginning of your upkeep, if you have no cards in hand, you draw 3. So, yes, that'll bring you to 4, and that can be a problem with your draw for turn, but it's still just a nice option. Library of Leng, so you skip your discard phase, and whenever a spell or effect forces you to discard a card, you can instead discard that card on top of your library instead. So, like, if you had something in hand that you wanted, you could just put it back on top of your library so you don't have to, like, get rid of it. Case of the Crimson Pulse, when it enters, discard a card, then draw 2, and then if you have no cards in hand, you get to solve it, and once it's solved, at the beginning of your upkeep, discard your hand and draw 2 cards. This one I liked because just discard your hand, draw 2, then draw for turn. So you're automatically at 3, so you're at a good number. This deck's all about keeping yourself in good numbers. Oath of Scholars during each player's upkeep, if that player has fewer cards in hand than target opponent, the player may discard their hand and draw 3 cards. Sure, this is going to bring you to 4 cards with your draw for turn. However, you're almost always going to have less cards in hand, so sometimes it's worth just trying to go to 4. And at worst, you use a flashback card or something with madness, and you don't really have to worry about it. Sorcerer class enters, draw 2, discard 2, and then letting your creatures tap for mana is just going to help you storm off faster. 1,000-Year Storm is going to give all your spells storm, or your instants and sorceries at least, so it'll just help you go off. Laboratory Maniac is one of the main win cons, because this deck just wants to keep going, so eventually if you run out of cards, well, Laboratory Maniac, no cards, win the game, you know? Scute Swarm is also an option because the deck wants to play so many lands. You can kind of just play a land, draw off of Flubs, play another land, and just keep getting Scute Swarm triggers. Aria of Flame, because you're casting so many instants and sorceries, you can build up the verse count pretty fast and just start burning out your opponents. Land-wise, Bountiful Landscape, Command Tower, Exotic Orchard, Forests, Frostboil Snarl, Islands, Mossfire Valley, Mountains, Overflowing Basin, Sheltered Thicket, which is also nice because you can cycle it. The deck plays the Scrylands just because it's nice to be able to put something on the bottom of your library if it's really not going to be useful for you. And Vine Glimmer Snarl. So, $93.30 budget. You can, like, include another $5 card in here if you wanted. Something solid, but, like, this is the perfect hand. This is the perfect hand. So, you go, draw for turn 1, you play a forest, you pass. You go mountain, you go Lotus Cobra, you pass. You go island, you run out Flubs the Fool, you have one, let's just say one blue floating let's go with 1 green floating. We have 1 green floating from Lotus Cobra. Then we get to play an extra land because of Flubs the Fool, which means that we have to discard a card. So we'll discard Deep Analysis, and then we get another trigger from Lotus Cobra. So now we're at 3 floating because we tapped the forest. So we play Tireless Provisioner, and we'll discard a Storm-Kiln Artist, and then we pass. And then we play a Mountain for turn. Now we have 1 from Lotus Cobra and a treasure from Tireless Provisioner. We'll discard Ramunap Excavator, and then we will play red, and then whatever we got from Lotus Cobra to play Conspiracy Theorist, to draw a card, to play an Arcane Signet, to draw a card, to play a Mountain. Now we have another one floating from Lotus Cobra, plus another treasure from Tireless Provisioner. Draw a card. Rampant Growth with whatever's floating from Lotus Cobra. Searches for a land, draws us a card. And then at this point we have treasures from Tireless Provisioner, because we also got more triggers from Lotus Cobra, or we have more floating mana from Lotus Cobra. We have treasures from Tireless Provisioner. Rampant Growth, just search for a land, so we got another trigger off of each. And then we could probably just go boop, boop, 1,000-Year Storm on turn 4, mind you, draw a card. And then at this point, Arcane Signet, Forest, for a Deep Analysis, draw 2 cards, discard, loot. But Deep Analysis would be copied for each other spell we cast this turn. So, draw 10 cards? And then at this point, we discard 1. But discarding 1 really doesn't matter that much, because then, at worst, we just go to next turn, we play Azusa, and we just go the fuck off. Like, let's just look at this real quick. So I guess we get rid of Artful Dodge. We go to turn 5. We run out Azusa. We will discard Containment Construct. And then play a Forest, discard Quiet Speculation, play a Exotic Orchard, discard a counterspell. No, actually, discard Gruul Signet. Play Forest, because we can play 4 total lands because of Azusa and Flubs. Discard Counterspell. Which anything we discarded would have gotten exiled by Conspiracy Theorist. So we technically could still cast anything that we discarded this turn. And then, I mean, what is the opponent supposed to do at this point? Because we go, I completely even forgot about that. So then we use floating mana to cast Gruul Signet. We discard a card, so we discard Temple of Mystery, which we can still use. Shit. And then, like, cast Chatterstorm now, which kind of sucks, because we've only played lands. But we create a squirrel, draw a card, play Temple of Epiphany, scry 1, put it on the bottom of our library, draw a card, play Secrets of the Key, draw a card, play Ancient Grudge, draw a card, play Party Thrasher, draw a card, return... We don't have 2 islands, but we could just hard cast Gush at this point, and then Thousand Year Storm, we would just continue drawing, and let's be real, that's fucking ridiculous. We had Thousand Year Storm on turn 4, the deck just goes off. That's if you're lucky, let's be real. That I could have played that smarter, I could have remembered what some of my cards did, but this deck is fucking ridiculous. And that's why it would be included in my fucking briefcase of decks I would carry around. To play a second game, we go Mountain. We pass. Oh, never mind. It's going to be one of these. We go to turn 4. We Arcane Signet. We pass. We go to turn 5. We Talisman of Creativity. We Lotus Cobra. We pass. We run out Loot. Not Loot. Flubs. Loot could be like an alternate commander for this deck, honestly. Play... Do we want to... Okay. Yeah, we play Containment Construct. We discard Flamesmith. We pass. Temple of Abandon. Enter Scry 1. Put on the bottom of our library. Mana Geyser. Add a shit ton of red. We're just going to say 10 red. For each tapped land our opponents control, it's turn 7. Let's say we add 15 red. That sounds about right? So we add 15 red. We play a Storm-Kiln Artist. We play... Sorry, we have to discard. We play Case of the Crimson Pulse. So then we discard a card. Draw 2. We have to discard 1 to Flubs. We play a Forest. We draw. We play Quiet Speculation. We draw. Like... The deck just goes off. That's what it does. That being said, this has been MTG Man. Let me know if you want to talk about any of the other decks that would be in my suitcase. Niv Mizzet I've already talked about. Don Andres Outlaws I've kind of talked about. Cormel I've really been considering. It's an interesting combo deck. Malcolm Fast Shit is kind of cheap. And Shrines, but everybody really knows how to build Shrines at this point. Or Arctic Monkeys, if you really want to talk about Arctic Monkeys. But just let me know in the comments, and yeah, it's been MTG Man. Peace out.